Good morning, fellow ladders. Welcome to another live lighting critique. Today we're looking at Michal Sosna, and Michal's done a Unreal Engine piece set in a temple, an ancient temple, and using some reference images and footage from Wonka Wai's In the Mood for Love. And this is the final scene where uh, the main protagonist is at Angkor Wat, and we see really nice play of light on the subject and on the buildings. And so this makes for a really nice reference, a nice point of reference for your piece. So, Mikhail, I had a look through your video. Let's see whether we can just pull it up real quick. Okay. Okay. So this is it. It's a nice tracking shot looking back towards the subject, and we have the key light or the sunlight coming from upper screen left, and it's got this really nice quality hitting the columns of the temple and the walls and the ceiling and roof. And we're getting some nice rim lights on the subject. And so we look back at the reference images here. It has a very similar feel. So I guess your take on it is very similar to this, the sun angle being in such a way that it is hitting the face of the columns and the walls, that are facing camera, and also the subject is getting lit both indirectly and directly. And I guess my first looking at this end frame here, my first reaction is that it does, it's got a really nice quality, but it does feel like it's a little bit flat. So to tell you what I mean, it feels like the atmosphere, you've probably got that at a level where it starts to make the image a little bit cloudy and a little bit muddy. And so I would recommend maybe pushing back that atmo so that it affects more of the background. And with the foreground here, maybe let's try and leave that, or at least reduce it, so that we have some contrast. So we have this contrast here, particularly the subject. If we could reduce the atmo somewhat, we can start to read the subject more as a silhouette, which I think is really nice against the columns in the background there that are being lit up. So that makes a nice reading. All right. I guess my second, with the sort of beginning frames, it's looking really nice. I really like the light hitting the the columns here. That's quite nice. I'm wondering whether it it does, even though it's got a really nice quality, the subject starts to um, you start to sort of lose him in the reading a little bit. So I'm wondering whether you could perhaps maybe curate where the highlights are strongest. I mean, it's really great that you have really strong highlight here because it sort of draws the eye towards the subject. But maybe you could increase it a little bit here so that we get this kind of overall focus on the subject here. And in the meantime, you could try maybe bringing the values of the highlights down as we recede towards the background there. So maybe the intensity of the highlights can go down towards the back here, and then we bring back up some of the highlights here, like that. And it would be really nice also if you could maybe try getting the subject a little bit darker so that we get a sort of a contrasted reading between the highlights on the walls and the silhouette. We sort of read this kind of rim silhouette on the subject. And I would maybe look at bringing down these reeds in the foreground. They make a nice sort of compositional device, but I'm wondering whether they're a little bit too overlit here. The background there looks fine. It can kind of recede. I can see you've got a little bit of defocus there. Yeah, that's fine. I'm wondering whether it's a little bit too defocused given the camera lens. It looks like it's quite a wide angle, but you know, it's hard to tell with Unreal. Let's see. Yeah, guessing it's okay. But yeah, maybe if you could try and maybe reduce the foreground exposure of the reeds and some of the background columns in the beginning frame, and then as we get to the end here, maybe look at reducing some of the atmo in the foreground so that we read the subject as kind of a silhouette. Otherwise, it's looking very nice. I love the warmth of the light hitting the temple walls and columns, and this makes for a great reference. Good old Chris Doyle. I'd love to see this film again. Such a great study in lighting. All right, so next we have Joey. So Joey, I've got some before and afters. So I've got, you know, your original and where you're at. So maybe we can start on this frame. So on this frame, we have your original submission, which is, I feel, a little bit overlit. And this is where you're at. And I'm wondering whether I see you've taken down the background, but it feels like it's been taken down overall, and there's no sort of gradation between foreground and background. And you've left your subject exposed pretty much the same, which is fine, but I feel like there needs to be some kind of gradation between foreground and background. Otherwise it does leave the subject looking like there's sort of a light linking quality to it, in that there's a disconnect between the way the subject is lit and the environment that the subject exists in. In a lot of ways, the original is a lot more convincing. I'm wondering whether you could try. My suggestion was to perhaps try and darken the foreground. And you could maybe introduce some gobos of, bush or shrubs or tree leaves from the surrounding trees. So I would try maybe leaving background, not working on the background too much, maybe just a tad here and there, maybe strategically placing some gobos. Like that. So we have justification for the exposure hitting our character. So we've got a kind of a raking. You could play like a raking light across here that hits the subject and the surrounding ground and plants here and rocks. Maybe this gets left right, and you have maybe bring this down as well. Something like that. And for this one, the original was here. Yep. So I'm wondering whether instead of like a general exposing down on the environment and mostly leaving the subject exposed quite high, you could try playing this kind of raking light across the ground, like this. And then you would get sorry. You would get the background there. Maybe this looks it's in like a rim. So we have shadow on this side. It starts to fall into sort of a darker values. Yeah, we leave some of that ground plane where the dragon is standing there. So we leave that same. Sorry. Instead of this kind of overall reduction of exposure on the environment, let's try something like this. And overall, I feel like the exposure on the subject is probably a little bit too much, so maybe you could bring it down. Perhaps you could get a gobo coming across here so that the eye doesn't get distracted by this kind of hot spot here, and that we focus our attention on the face and this kind of very emotionally impactful scene. It's maybe like I would say maybe a quarter to a third of a stop exposed down. Okay, and then we have our original and this kind of update, and I feel like I noted your comment that you didn't want to bring down the foreground elements because in the next scene you would have there would be a foreground character. I'm guessing that larger dragon that's lying on the ground. Again, I feel like there's just been kind of a general bringing down of the, general bringing down of the background. And just leaving the foreground as it is. I just feel like one thing you could try, and one thing that I really love from your reference images, in particular this one here, is this silhouette of the characters against a brightly lit wall. And I think this could provide maybe the solution to our dilemma of not bringing down the exposure of the environment too much. So I'd like you to try this. I'd like you to try actually bringing down, bring the subject down like that. So expose down the subject. And then as a way to etch them out from the environment, I want you to try go the other way and then bringing up. up the... I guess we need a rationale for your subject to be kind of in silhouette like that. And it could be that maybe in the middle ground there is you could play some kind of gobo, and I don't know whether this will be successful in motion, but if you could at least try this for me. There is some sort of tree or something behind camera that's casting a shadow over this area, and it happens to fall on the subject and the surrounding rocks, and maybe here. But then leaves the background quite bright. Does that make sense? Let's try that. So let's try bringing up that wall in the background there, bringing that up. Bringing this guy up. Bring your subject, expose that down, and then get some kind of gobo that looks like it could be some indescript tree to kind of shadow this middle ground area so that we have rationale for this guy to fall into shadow. Maybe take a look at this as kind of one way to go down, one path to go down. You have this really nice shadowing that's happening with the foreground subjects being in shadow and having them read really well because you have the walls being hit by the sun like that. I think Roger Deakins was the DP on this, and I'm just a total fanboy of him, and I just think that this scene is really beautiful. So take a look at this and let it guide you in how you would treat this scene. Alrighty. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it for today. Thanks for sending in your stuff, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.